I want to let everybody know that this meeting is being recorded, and there will be a time at 4:55-ish for public comments. So if anybody signs up, we'll make sure we're taking public comments. And I'm going to call the roll for you to acknowledge your presence for the recording. So I'll start with the top. Ann Gravitt.
I'm here, sorry.
Great. Bob Salinger.
Here.
Lori Stegman. Corky Collier.
Here.
Dave Ripma. Mike Weatherby.
Here.
Shirley Craig.
Here.
Eric Molander.
Here.
James Allison.
Here and present.
John Niyama. John. I see John. You're on mute, John. There you go. John, are you here? All right, great. John L. Bell. Mary Helen Kincaid. Paul Lumley.
Here.
Steve Fancher. Tanny Stephenson.
Here.
And Tony DeFalco.
Here.
All right, thank you all. I don't have the agenda right in front of me. Emily, what's up first?
So the first is the Secretary Treasurer discussion that Hong is taking the lead on.
And Hong, you have we saw the staff report or a recommendation. Is there any?
Yes.
You gonna?
Great. So after last month's board meeting, there was a recommendation for us to pull some additional information together for this board to consider as it contemplates whether there's a need to create a board level or a staff level a role of secretary and or treasurer. I think in the last discussion, treasurer was what came up. So staff went and did some research, and we prepare a memo for you summarizing the research and really our recommendation. And as I look at this, really it comes down to two key issues for me and the basis for why we don't believe an appointment is necessary for the treasury and or secretary position. This particular special district is unlike any other special districts in so many ways, and this is one additional reason. But I'll just go, before I get into that, I'll just lay out sort of what my understanding of what a treasury or secretary position is generically. Treasury is somebody who is responsible or head of a department that's collects and manage and expend public monies and money. Secretary is somebody who's responsible for the record of an entity. And as we did our research, we learned that as a special district, many of the enabling statutes for the various special districts, they specify in the statute a creation, an appointment for these positions. In our statute, 550, while we are a special district, there is no statutorily created position for treasury and secretary. So that's one huge difference. The other, and again, holding this urban flood safety water quality district out as unique, is the fact that our district is subject to the Oregon local budget law. All the other special districts are not. So, and in my understanding of the Oregon budget law, local budget law, there are statutory requirements in that that really replicates what a treasury would do. The budget law is a financial plan or expenditure plan that tracks the expenditure, board-approved expenditure revenues that come in. And in fact, Oregon has a pretty progressive budget law where there is lots of due process, lots of citizen involvement, and that the budget law itself covers the whole cycle of the budget, from the creation of the budget to amendments in between to finally at the year-end auditing. On top of that, you have statutory positions under the budget law that really also mirrors some of the functions of a typical treasurer. You have a budget officer, and in fact, this board appointed a budget officer that is to be directed by the executive director. And he provides, Casey Short provides sort of the administrative support for the budget preparation. Under the budget law, this board also has as its disposal what some other special districts do not, if they're not subject to the budget law, budget committee. And in this case, this board has, filled those positions on the budget committee with all of you, the board members. And the budget committee, it provides the sort of the foundation advice to this district on budgetary issues. The budget committee has, as a statutory right under the budget law, to ask for whatever information it needs from staff in its effort to understand the budget, to make this policy decisions. So with that, and we've asked around with other special districts, and again, they clarify for us that they have these positions, at least in Oregon, because it's required by their law. We've also looked at some California districts. They have treasury, but that's more at a county level. They're inherently was not a good comparison because their governance structure is just so different from ours. So I'm not sure that's even an equivalent consideration. So with that, I just want to say that we have staff, current staff, who has decades of experience providing financial, treasury, budgeting services to 4 drainage districts. And they could serve these roles with the local budget law requirements and the budget committee. You are allowed to make these typical board policy related decisions concerning the revenues and the expenditure. The administration of that you'll have through the executive director, your budget officer, and our district accountant. And and I'm not sure that a board appointed level treasurer would want to take on those administrative tasks that are better suited for the executive director and her staff. So I know that, so with that, I'll just end my discussion there and leave it open for questions or discussion among the board members. So I'll turn it back to you, Mike.
Thank you, Hong. Are there any questions before we have folks, if they want to make any comments, but are there any clarifying questions about what you've read or heard?
I'll question to make sure I understood. The budget, we could have a budget committee who could address concerns of the board, take them to Casey and whoever the financial specialist is could bring that information back to us.
Yes.
And so, okay.
That is correct.
Okay. Okay. Are we going to have a discussion on what we think? I mean, or?
I just want to make sure that everybody's got all the information they think they need, and there aren't any substantive questions right now. And then, yes, we'll want to hear what folks think.
I just want, this is Peggidy. I'd like to add just one other thing. As subject to public budget law, we are also responsible for our responsibilities also to the tax conservation and what is it?
Tax Supervising and
Tax
Conservation Commission.
Supervisory and Conservation. Yes, thank you. I'm on vacation. I'm a little slow here today. As such, they are also overseeing our budget and asking us questions. So I just want to let you know there's a number of layers here that we are adhering to and are required to adhere to.
Okay, if there are no other questions, the floor is open for folks' comments for at least a few minutes. We've got on the agenda for this.
Okay, I've got a comment, as
Okay.
always. But it just seems to me that we have very talented staff who has knowledge of the process. If there's someone on the budget committee that has a strong desire and experience that matches that, to me, it's kind of like a job description and duplicity of work. And I know Casey's background a little bit and know that he's worked with many levels of government, has worked with MCD, knows the background, and could support us. And to add one more layer of budget committee a treasurer, I just see it as a duplicity of efforts and possibly slowing the process down in getting to where we want to get with this flood district. I have no concerns over the work of the staff. Some other people may, I don't know, but from a neighbor standpoint, I think we've have the full trust of the drainage district and their work. So I'll just add that to the support.
Okay, Shirley, you've got your hand up.
Well, I just want to say thank you. I agree with the recommendation, but I just want to say thank you to staff for the excellent research on this. It's very interesting. And I didn't realize that this special district was that much different than other special districts.
Well, we're really, really special.
We're really, you're really special.
Yeah, so anyway, so thank you for the work. I was interested that you've contacted other special districts in California, and thank you. You just did a good job with the research. It's very helpful.
Eric?
Yeah, thank you. There we go. So the purpose of this is really internal controls. And Ms. Sean, what you've done is you've conflated efficiency with effectiveness. And one of the most important things to do in internal controls is ensure that you have the ability to ensure that you never make a thief out of an honest person. So the role of the treasurer is quite different from a standard accountant or budget officer because we will be required to raise a significant amount of capital. Mm-hmm. And the thing that you missed in your recommendation that I'd like you to add in the future is that this is an individual that would have to be supporting the staff on raising what's likely to be, $60 million for if we go with option 5, plus the additional money. So we're going to be raising order of magnitude $80, $100 million mm-hmm. in the capital markets. And this is something that a treasurer, a member of the board that would oversee and support those activities is really important. So in the future, with this kind of recommendation, please make certain that you include the capital formation portion of the role of the treasurer.
So Eric, I appreciate what you just said. We raise just somewhere in the vicinity of $100 million every year in the capital markets. at BES. And we have no treasurer that oversees us. There is an elected auditor that oversees the entire city, generally a performance auditor. And we do have a financial auditor that comes in every year and audits the whole city's books. But I guess I struggle with the fact that we're in the bond markets actually for about $200 million every other year. And so I struggle with the comparison there.
So who actually is the person that executes those deals on your staff at BES?
Business services manager and a budget director and a financial analyst that does the forecasting. And the city has staff overall that prepare the official statements. And we, of course, review those, but ultimately it's the overall city that issues the debt. And so the official statement comes from the city.
Right. And so it's really the city that has fiduciary responsibility. Now, in the case of the Urban Flood Safety and Water Quality District, we're the ones with the fiduciary responsibility.
So Eric,
So
I'll
there is
just,
a very significant difference, Ms. Yun.
yeah. So with respect to an explicit fiduciary duty, there isn't one in any statute that says you board members of the special district has a fiduciary duty. There's no explicit requirement. There may be at the city or county level. I don't know. But I can tell you that as a special district elected board member, you don't have an explicit statutory fiduciary duty. Now, you have other ethical obligations, other responsibilities that are akin to a fiduciary duty, and they come out of the budget law, the local budget law that obligates you to manage your budget fiscally responsibly. You also have ethical considerations, ethics law considerations that you can't take. You have to be responsible and not take any of the public money for your benefit. So I would caution this board that if you want to take on a specific fiduciary duty, that would be in addition to what you're required to do under specific explicit law.
So are you saying that we have no fiduciary responsibility?
There's no explicit. You have fiduciary duties under like the budget law. You have fiduciary duties under ethics law. You have fiduciary duties under public meeting law. You have fiduciary duty under public records law. All that combined with your responsibility to manage the public money for the benefit of the public, mainly through the ethics law. But if you're asking me for a specific statute that imposes on you a specific fiduciary duty, there isn't. Now, if you want to adopt that because it's a reasonable thing for board members to do, because maybe some case law finds that that's a necessary thing to do, we could do that. It would just be in addition to whatever is in the statute that has enabled this board.
Are there other folks who want to weigh in on this? Shirley, you still have your hand up. I think it's from before, but you still have it up. So.
Yes, I'll take it down. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm not sure how, I guess it's down now.
Okay, yes, it is. Mike Weatherby, are you?
Yeah, I just say that I concur with what Hong said. I don't think we really need that position.
Anybody else want to comment on this right now?
Do we need a motion?
Actually, I don't think that we do, because this is one of those situations in which it's really up to the board chair to decide whether or not we need another official position and to support the MCDD staff. And if he doesn't, it's okay with me. If he does, then I find good reason to be able to do that. And it's really Mike's decision as to whether or not he wants this additional level of internal control and to have an additional person that's supporting the staff, which has never raised this kind of money, to be able to do it. So it's, you know, we don't need a board level decision on this. It's really up to Mike.
I love it when that happens. That's terrible.
No, seriously. I mean,
I hear you, Eric. I hear you. Well, I actually think that we've got a plenty of oversight that we need, and unless there's a significant movement on the board to want to change what we've got, then I'm comfortable where we are for now. And obviously, if the board, if there's a movement on the board to change that, then we can talk more about it. So at this point, thank you, Hong, for the work, and thank the staff, whoever else was involved in the research. Really appreciate it. I echo Shirley's comment. I thought it was very thorough and gave us a perspective. So with that, what's the next issue on the agenda?
Bylaws. Next on the agenda is the bylaws.
Okay. Kelly?
All right. Good afternoon. Glad to see everyone again. This section that we're going to be talking about today is on basically public meetings and meetings of the board. It turned out to be a really long section, so that's all I will punish you with today. So this really is a compilation of the Oregon Public Meetings Law, as well as some other best practices that we've seen in review of other Oregon public entity bylaws and ordinances. And then some of it I purposefully left a little bit vague or with multiple options, and that's just because I've seen over the last 6 months how quickly the public meetings law is changing in response to COVID and online meetings and such. And so I tried to give quite a bit of flexibility for this board to be able to have different formats of meetings, but while still complying with the legal requirements.
Hey, Randy, it's Bill. I'm just double checking with you that we can defer the opening of this. Fairview Lake.
Bill, can you go on mute?
Bill, can you mute? Thank you.
All right. So the first section is just a general statement about public meetings, what they are. I think in retrospect, I'd like to make the definition of meeting a little broader to reflect the public meetings law, that it's not necessarily just meetings of this board, but can also include meetings of subcommittees and other bodies that are still required to follow the public meetings law. The next section goes through the different types of meetings, and these are statutory. However, there is some flexibility in terms of notice to board members. And so I've just put in here some proposals of, for example, special meetings that board members would be communicated with via email and by phone, depending on how much notice that they would be given. So if we'll just go through these really briefly, regular meetings, those are essentially your monthly meetings. So just as a straw man, essentially I put in here that those would be the third Monday of each month. I didn't set a time, but you're certainly more than welcome to. That's kind of the practice that we've set so far, is meeting on the third Monday. I think it's a best practice to have the date, at least, of the meeting be set in the bylaws, so because that gives not only the board members prior notice of each board meeting as well as the public, so that there's a predictable meeting schedule for folks to follow. And then the next statement is, of course, if we're going to have this on Monday, then there's likely going to be a lot of holidays that are falling on Mondays, and then in those cases the meeting would just fall on the following day. The next section is on special meetings, and special meetings are basically any meeting that's called with at least 24 hours notice that's not a regular meeting. So it's really broad, and these would just be kind of meetings that are called ad hoc, and those in this version can be called by the chair, the vice chair, or any two directors. And that's just something that I've seen commonly be the folks or set of folks who are able to call special meetings. Sometimes I've seen it where 3 directors are required. And in this case, it would generally be an email notice to board members of the board meeting, and then they would receive a phone call if the meeting was going to occur within 2 days. The next section is on emergency meetings, and that's basically any meeting that is called with less than 24 hours notice, requires an actual emergency. So failure to plan ahead is not an actual emergency and would not qualify for this type of meeting. And I discovered a copy and paste error there. So the notice to directors in that situation is meant to be by phone and email as soon as possible, given the emergency circumstances. Are there any questions on the types of meetings that can be held or notice requirements or anything like that?
It might just be me, but I only see the first page. I haven't seen the ones after that you've been referencing to.
In your packet?
Oh, in the packet. Okay, I thought it was going to show up on the screen.
Oh,
Okay.
gotcha. Yeah, no, no, the text of the bylaws would be a lot of words to put on the PowerPoint. So yeah, so if you can follow along in your packet. Otherwise, I'll just do sort of a brief description of each section.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, sure.
I have a question about the meeting. You mentioned, you don't mention the public notice timeline. Traditionally, you have to have at least 24 hours notice. Is that something that has to be in the bylaws? You reference by law that we would follow the state laws around public meetings. Is that all that's needed regarding the timing of notice to the public for our meetings?
So generally, notice to the public should be reasonable given the circumstances. And so for emergency meetings, if it's not in there, it was intended to, and like I said, I think there was a copy and paste error in that particular section. And the public notice requirements have also been an area that has changed slightly during this pandemic. And so certainly staff calling the meeting would follow the requirements of the particular type of meeting. And if you think it would be helpful to include that more specifically in the bylaws, I'm happy to do that.
I can't find where I was reading it now. So just relook at it and determine if you think all the information is there regarding public notice. Because I know at Metro, we have to be pretty careful about how much time that we make sure we give adequate time for the public to be aware of our meeting. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we have a regular meeting date set, at least for the regular meetings, that will be helpful. And I can certainly include the public notice requirements in addition to notice that we will be giving to actual board members in the bylaws.
Thank you.
Very easily do that. Okay, any other questions on that section of types of meetings?
Kelly, there's a notice, one of the section notices is about the media. And that's a very broad term. Who's the media?
In terms of notice, generally media is anyone who falls sort of within that category that has asked to be given special notice of the meeting outside of. So if, and I know that in the past, we have kept a list of folks that have reached out to us and said, you know, if they're from a newspaper or radio or a news station, things like that, and they've said, please give us notice of your meetings and other various goings on, then we'll do that via email to give them special notice.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. The next section is on executive session, and this is pretty well set in statute. There are some various and sundry reasons why boards can go into executive session, and in general, it's important to give notice. And so if we know ahead of time that we're going to have an executive session, it should go in the posted notice itself. Occasionally boards will want to go into executive session during a meeting. And in that case, the chair will just announce the statutory reason and notify everyone at the meeting that they are going into executive session. And at that point, only certain folks are allowed to stay for that portion of the meeting. And then of course, no decisions are to be made in executive session. And then this section 9.3, and Shirley, maybe this will be an appropriate place to talk more in further detail about notice to the public about the various types of meetings.
Yes, that's what I was reading. I lost it after I read it. So that's
all right.
Yes, because I would think you'd put the time in here, but you reference as required by law. And so I'm asking, is by using the phrase as required by law, that's all we need at this point, because obviously the law will likely change.
It could, yeah. So if there's anything more specific than that, that I find, I will include it in there, especially if it's for emergency and special meetings that could be more important in those cases.
So Kelly, I just sat through the SDAOs, the special districts meeting and training session on this. My understanding from that was that if a member of the media wants to actually sit in on the executive session, they're allowed to observe, but they're sort of bound by restrictions about what they can report out. Is that correct?
That is correct. There are a couple of situations where the media are not allowed to sit in, and those include, I think, labor negotiations, and then attorney-client privileged communications. And so in those, other than those, the media can sit in. They are not allowed to report out as long as the board stays on task. So if the conversation goes outside of whatever the statutory reason is for having the discussion, then they will put their pen back to paper and start taking notes for publishing if they were interested and it was newsworthy. And so it's kind of just a public check on the board so that they can sit in there and hear what's going on but not report on it.
The other common practice is that when the board members walk out of executive session and the member of the media asks you, well, what'd you think of that executive session? And you tell them, you're allowed to report on that.
Food for thought. All right, the next section is conduct of meetings, and this is just kind of a compilation of best practices, and there's a lot of flexibility in here to make adjustments if you would like. This section talks about the authority of the chair to kind of keep order of the meeting and exclude anybody who's disruptive or threatening, those sorts of things. It references, oh, did I hear somebody? Okay. In terms of Robert's rules, it's kind of a nice procedure to follow. Not all of Robert's rules is appropriate for public bodies. They have some principles like secret ballots that we absolutely cannot do. So I always put a little asterisk by a use of Robert's rules, but I think it's kind of a good way to just keep order. And then I put a note in there that failure to follow Robert's rules will not invalidate any action of the board that's otherwise valid. Voting procedures, roll call is misspelled. I have fixed that. So directors will vote via roll call, particularly in this electronic time. I think it's important that we have votes with names, and then just a simple aye or yes, nay or no, or abstain in your vote. In the next three sections, I have outlined some very basic principles distinguishing motions from resolutions and when either might be appropriate. The basic distinction is that policy level decisions should be in the form of a resolution, which is basically just a written motion, and that there should be a second with any motion. So some of these things I've just seen in other bylaws that are good practices, but that do give some guidance as to whether a motion or resolution is appropriate. And then certainly any policy level decision that would affect electors would have to be in the form of an ordinance and not in the form of a resolution, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions, comments on that section? All right. The next section is on the agenda. So I put together kind of a straw man order of business, which starts with call to order, roll call, consent agenda, reports, elections, unfinished business, new business, and adjournment. One question that I did have was whether I should put in the permanent order of business a section for public testimony. That is something that the current districts that we manage do as part of their regular agenda, but it's not required. So that was a question that I had for this board. And I'll get back to that after I go just through these last couple of things. The agenda items would be placed on the agenda via the chair with review from the executive director and legal counsel. And then I also put in a procedure for consent agenda, but you'll note that it's not substantive. So we don't have a substantive piece in here about what goes on the consent agenda. Most things that are on a consent agenda are things that have prior been discussed. And so it's not something that you would typically throw on there unless it's a very regular item of business or something that has been discussed at a prior meeting. But for now, all I've put in there is a procedure for consent agenda. And so if we want to go back to the order of business or anything on the agenda section.
Well, while it's not required, I think it's good public practice to have a spot on every agenda for the public to be able to comment. You know, within reason, it seems just like we should always at least have that there for people if they want it. That makes sense to me.
I agree, and it should be at the beginning of the meeting, I think, so in case, well, I have a comment and a question, so I'll go back to the question. So it depends on the jurisdiction, but some jurisdictions allow, all public comment at the beginning, regardless if it's about a pertinent item on the agenda, later in the agenda. Other jurisdictions have general public comment at the beginning, and then any comments made on specific agenda items are made at the time the committee or the group gets to that item on the agenda. So I'm just throwing that out. It's not a recommendation, it's just an observation. So I'm not sure what you would suggest in this case for this group.
What we do at our city council is because of the electronic, the issues now with the COVID is that the public comment is through mail, through or written comments, because how would you involve them in the meeting electronically like this?
Can definitely be a challenge, that's for sure.
Well, Kelly, what is the role of the chat function inside of Zoom? Is that a method of having public comments? Because I know Colin keeps reading it out at the end of every meeting.
Yeah, so the problem with the chat function is how it gets captured as part of the public record. And so if we were to use the chat function more regularly or as part of the meeting, then I would suggest that it would be somebody's role to sort of print that out. The other challenge that you have with the chat function is that it's not certain that that people who are participating in the meeting are using or viewing the chat function. So there may be an entirely different conversation going on in the chat that some people don't have a chance to view or participate in. And so that's why we've kind of adopted this practice of reading the statements so that not only are they part of the public record at the end of the meeting, but also anyone who didn't have a chance to view the chat function before the end of the meeting would hear what was going on in there. So I would caution against it, but.
And I would just like to add is that since our meeting minutes are maintained as a recording and they're electronic, That's one of the reasons that Colin does read it at the end, is a demonstration there has been comment so that as Kelly indicated, everybody gets to hear it and it is part of our public record.
Yeah, and I don't know that if the public, so we do have to provide a place where the public can listen to the meetings, even if they're not participating. And it's not, I don't know enough about how Zoom works for somebody who is just viewing it, you know, as kind of an outsider, if they can view the chat part of it, so.
Well, I'm sure a supporter of public comment, and I think we should make sure that it's the public is able to make comment if they choose. It can be by email ahead of the meeting, or it could be at the meeting at the appropriate time on the agenda. Metro's been able to manage. We just pause the meeting and allow people to call in that might want to make public comment, and that seems to be working just fine using Zoom. So I don't know if you need to go into detail in this regarding that, but.
Well, just so I'm clear, how is the public allowed to listen into this? Do they let us know in advance that they want to be on the call, or how is that?
The dial-in information is published in the public notice, and so we don't require anyone to like register ahead of time or let us know. And I do control like the waiting room who enters the meeting, but otherwise it's open to the public electronically, either by phone or video.
Okay.
So
I just want to make a quick comment. My experience with how the city of Portland's doing public testimony seems to work very smoothly. I mean, I've only done it twice. I was an invited testifier once and then a testifier another time. So maybe model that with electronic function. And the other comment, if we ever get back to in-person meetings, that we limit public comment to 3 minutes, 4 minutes, whatever it is, because I've experienced ranting public comments where there's no basis for somebody to say, sit down and be quiet now. So if we can put a time limit on it in-person meetings, and then maybe also if electronically we allow them to comment at a meeting, but surely submitting emails prior to gives those that administer the meeting a time to see.
The way that these are drafted,
I concur with that.
This does give the chair the authority to set the time limit, and I think 3 minutes is a perfect limit.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of the bylaws, I think it's fine. You could have comments at the beginning, the end, you could leave it vague. My suggestion is, in addition to the required public comment period, that we make it just a unofficial policy that at the end of, anytime we have the public in attendance on a particular item, that they're allowed to comment during the discussion of that item. Mm-hmm. Rather than only at the beginning and the end of the meeting. I don't think we need to put that in the bylaws necessarily, but it's a good policy for us to follow.
I agree. I think meetings flow a little better if the public is there and they're interested in a particular item, that they be allowed to comment at the same time that the board is kind of deliberating, if you will, on the item. Just makes for a more cohesive conversation, I think. So. There any other questions or comments? Kelly, are you?
So that's all I have in the agenda section. I have 4 more sections that I can go through really quickly because they're mostly just guided by statute.
Okay.
So public comments or testimony, that section does require prior notice, or excuse me, not require, but it gives us the option to require it. And the reason why I put that in is because it has been useful in certain online circumstances to ask people to identify themselves ahead of time so that we can recognize them when they come into the meeting. And so if at any point we start having lots of public attending, or an issue that comes up that attracts a lot of public attention, then that way we can kind of organize and make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak. But otherwise that we'll just follow applicable law. And I left this vague because again, this is a section that I've seen a lot of change over the course of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Electronic participation, this gives board members the option to participate electronically. So basically this just takes away any notion that board members are required to attend in person if and when we go back to that sort of a situation. So this allows board members to attend electronically if that makes a difference for them in terms of being able to attend or not. And then when it's in the interest of the public health, safety, or welfare, which is the situation that we're in currently. And then just to make clear that we're making this available to the public in those situations. And then record of proceedings, this is generally guided by statute. It writes out explicitly what's required by law in essentially your meeting minutes. So that's all I have. I don't know, Mike, if you want to have any discussion on any of those sections further.
Not unless anybody has any questions or comments. Right now we're a few minutes behind schedule, but not too far. And if not, these will all come back to us at some point for ultimately discussion and adoption when we pull the whole package together, right?
Yep.
Okay, terrific.
Can you hear me, Mr. Chair? This is Paul Limley.
Go ahead, Paul. Yes.
Yeah. Sorry to go back, but I saw there's a paragraph in here about Robert's rules. I don't think we're following Robert's rules, are we?
Only loosely.
Yeah, so I don't know if we need to have that section. It might cause some confusion. And also I don't quite understand the definition under motions. It says motion should not be used to adopt or approve a matter that will create policy or have major effect beyond the meeting. And then there's another sentence about resolutions it says resolution should not be used for adoption of law or policy. It applies to the electors of what do you call this? UFSWQD? And, so I'm just wondering if staff could explain those two sections and what motions are not and what resolutions are not, what that means. And also,
sure.
I recommend deleting the section on Robert's rules if we're not going to use them.
I'm okay with that. If other people are in agreement that Robert's rules is not the way we want to operate, and that's fine. Like I said, this is a section that we have a lot of flexibility to make changes. In regard to the motions versus resolutions, the distinction that I was trying to make there and that I've seen in other bylaws is that motions generally are sort of matters of procedure that sort of apply to the meeting itself in general. That said, with our other boards, we do a lot of motions that are kind of to give staff direction on something that's not final, things like that that are less substantive. But then in terms of actual policy level decisions that the board is making, that those should be written down and memorialized in a way that's essentially easier to find for both staff and board members in the future, as well as the public. So I think the intent was just to make sure that these policy level decisions are being written down. And then in terms of resolutions versus ordinances, there's definitely some gray there as to what types of decisions would be appropriate for either. And the distinction that is clear that I've seen is that these policy level decisions that apply to electors. So in terms of if we were to set a utility rate, for example, that would be something that we would do in an ordinance versus a resolution. So hopefully that gives some clarification, but it's a good question because it is definitely gray. There's between each of those types of decision-making methods.
Thank you.
I'd like to, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I said thank you.
Okay,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
I have a comment. I tend to like Robert's Rules of Orders because it provides some structure. And if you don't have that, then you're just really winging it. And I think informality is nice, but I think it's a good practice to go by the seat of your pants. And I've seen it in the public bodies I've been associated with. They use Robert's Rules of Order or something akin to that.
This is Hong. Thanks, Mike, for that comment. And you'll note that the way we phrased that provision, it's just following the principles. It's not mandatory. It's not compulsory.
Mhm.
It's, it's a guidance for this board to consider and follow when there is a confusion about what the procedures are. So I would recommend leaving in, the suggestion or using it as guidance than not.
Good point.
Okay, I'm gonna kind of cut us off here. This stuff will come back as a whole package and another crack at it as we go on. But we're getting a little bit behind schedule. So if okay, if there's no further comments, I'd like to have, is it Hong or Kelly or who's handling the agent?
I'll do that.
Okay.
So this hopefully will gain back some minutes on this. This is basically a statutory requirement for the special districts to adopt a registered agent. In the case of a dissolution, they want to be able to find where the district representatives are. But on a practical level, some financial institutions we've encountered require that there's a registered agent for banking purposes. So this motion, as we have asked of all the other special districts to appoint your executive director as the registered agent. It's so that we have a filing with the Oregon Secretary of State. It will be on a form that will have the title of the executive director as your registered agent, and along with your the MCDD office as your principal place of business.
Okay, any questions? If not, then I'd entertain a motion as is recommended.
So moved.
Moved by Mike Weatherby
Second.
and a second by Corky, that we adopt resolution number 2020-09-01 to designate the UFSWQD executive director as the district's registered agent. Any discussion? If not, I'll call the roll. Ann Gravitt,
Yes.
Bob Salinger, we're here, Bob. I'll come back. Lori Stegman,
Aye.
Corky Collier,
Aye.
Dave Ripma, Mike Weatherby,
Aye.
Shirley Craddock,
Aye.
Eric Molander,
Aye.
James Allison,
Aye.
John Niyama,
Aye.
John L. Bell,
Aye.
Mary Helen Kincaid,
Aye.
Paul Lumley,
Aye.
Steve Fancher,
Aye.
Tanny Stephenson,
Aye.
Tony DeFalco,
Yes.
and Bob Salinger.
Sorry, aye.
Okay, and the chair votes aye. So that's unanimous.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you. The next order of business is Peggidy with revenue development exercise results from our last meeting.
Good afternoon, and I wanted to provide, I'm hoping this comes through okay. I'm a little distant from Portland, so I'm not sure how well the connection is, but I wanted to take the opportunity. You all went through a process at the last meeting, which was extremely to provide staff an understanding of where the board's priorities may be and to shape our briefings moving forward and what kind of information we can provide. As such, we had asked we had asked everyone on an individual basis, provided them a list of 11 categories that we anticipate are part of the rate development process. We also extended the opportunity, if there was anything that we were missing, to also add, which we did not receive. So the first sheet that you're seeing now, and you can kind of hit this if you want a little bit, Jasmine, but this kind of gave you the readout. I know you got this in your packet of where the various components with administration, assets, capital funding, capital planning, district boundaries, emergency operations, equity, environment, federal standards, operation and maintenance, and reserves, and kind of where they fell out in the priorities. There's a way of kind of, you can look at it in a couple different positions. We chose to kind of look at where the the largest number was in each of those priorities. Does not mean that some of these categories ended up getting, we asked you to rank them 1 to 5, I'm sorry. And when we did that, we also asked to, I also wanted to let you know that 12 of the 17 board members participated, and we also extended the opportunities for those that weren't at the meeting to provide us feedback. I don't think we ever received any, but we had given a couple opportunities. So this is the compilation of the results, and we took the approach that which had the greatest concentration at each priority level. The red circles indicate those priorities, and I thought it was fairly interesting. There were a couple things, the least amount of the priorities that got the least amount of attention. Not saying they're not a priority somewhere in the list, where the two things were the district boundaries and reserves. The others were still had some numbers attached to them and votes to them, but they were not as highly identified. So if you can go to the next slide, Jasmine, please. Thank you. So as far as priorities and this is from the individual rankings, equity came in first, capital funding was second on a second priority, operations and maintenance was third, federal safety standards were fourth, and emergency operations was fifth, which I think is interesting to summarize those. When we talk about equity, it was really, and we'll talk a little more about it in detail, but equity was clearly identified in our the 2019 legislation. So it's a critical component of this new district. Capital funding we've recognized as important, and we'll talk a little more about it, but as we all have been subjected to or discussed earlier is the issue that, you know, with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, their Portland Metro levy study, feasibility study, is identifying additional capital requirements. We also have drainage master plans where we're starting to identify costs for the internal system as well. So I just wanted to hit a couple of those as we went through this. And there were a couple other things I just wanted to make note of that I think it's important. These drainage master plans we've already initiated at the districts. Some have been completed, some have not. Our FEMA accreditation certification is what the Levy Ready Columbia group has been focused on, and the core is also what Levy Ready and the existing Columbia Quarter Drainage districts have been focused on. Operations and maintenance, obviously, one of the things that's been really important to us is that we are operating, maintaining those, the levy system and our overall system to federal standards. so that we can participate in the rehabilitation program with a core, and also the recognition that we're good stewards of public investment dollars. And so we have a pretty extensive, the existing districts have a pretty extensive operations and maintenance process, and a manual that has been approved by our existing, by the core. Emergencies operations is obviously there for our federal safety standards is for accreditation and making sure that we have certification. And then our emergency operations is making sure that we protect the residences, the businesses, and the asset, both public and private assets that are within our system. Next slide, please. Then we went to then, as if you all recall, we broke out into 4 different groups with 4 members, 3 to 4 members in each group, because it really provided an opportunity for you all to talk within among yourselves of where you see the priorities as board members, as a team or as a group. It's and discuss why and what for. It was clear that it really didn't want to come out through that process with identifying like number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There was more a discussion of which ones they want each of the groups wanted emphasized. So that's where we landed. And I think a couple of things should be noted on this. One is equity became even more important and became a major conversation in recognizing that equity is embedded in all the categories that have been identified in that list. I think the interesting piece of that, which I feel is so critical, is I think many of you have been involved with organizations that have been in place and have now, over the last 4 to 5 years, started to try and embed and push equity into that system and incorporate it. And I just want to say it is critically important to our organization. The beauty is that we get to work with it from the ground up, which I think is incredible. The next thing that came up, which wasn't in the individuals, I want to mention, the environment came up in the groups, did not come up in the categories for the individuals. So I think it's a critical piece to recognize. People are starting to understand that the environment is a critical component of our legislation and needs to be taken into account as far as climate change, habitat, resiliency, managing the floodplain, etc. The 3 of the 4 groups also raised was capital planning and recognizing what we need to get done over the next, a little bit already about the operations and maintenance and the importance of that, and the federal safety standards, adhering and making sure that we are protecting our region. Any questions? Comments?
How do you think we're going to use this, Peggidy?
I look at this as it's starting, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it in the next few slides.
Oh, okay.
This helps to provide how we will start to bring forward to the board and inform them within each of those categories. I'm going to talk about that a little further, and what has been done or being done by our existing districts, and what we will be looking to the board for as we move forward. Is that helpful?
Sure.
Okay.
I had a similar question.
Next slide, please.
Nope.
Yeah.
Mary Helen, go ahead.
No, when you say how we're going to use these, and it can be a later discussion, but I know that the number one theme of the people that I represent in the neighborhoods is to keep their house dry. And in an equitable fashion, recognizing all of those things. I think we need to keep in mind the fundamental responsibility that a flood and its urban flood safety, that is a strong tenet in what we do. All those other things feed into that. I know we don't have money, we can't provide operations and maintenance, all of those things. But if you have nothing to protect because flood safety is not a number one priority, then all the other things aren't gonna matter. So flood safety, I believe, speaks to the environment, speaks to the equity, those are all feed into that. So I'm not skilled enough to be able to know how that fits into the correct language. But if any neighborhood meeting that I go to or participate in, it's the people say, we don't care what they do as long as we don't lose our house. And you're not going to get past that if we don't have that language forefront when we start asking people to pay for something. And I think that's going to be important to keep in mind.
Absolutely. So Peggidy, we're going to maybe keep us moving here. We're a little behind.
Okay. Next slide, please. Jasmine. We can go on. So I know that everybody has been focused on the issue of getting our revenue structured put together so that we can provide flood safety and reduce our risks, et cetera. So what I thought we would do is take some of the information that came out of that conversation. And this slide basically takes those 11 components, those 11 categories that we talked about, and put equity as an overarching equity. I mean, I look at this as a mechanism. All these other things have to be done. What we want to be able to do is embed that equity question and issue as we put this information together. And the revenue model at the bottom demonstrates it's composed of all these different aspects. And the next slide, please. So when we, and this slide just shows you the ones that were, that came to the forefront in that exercise. Next, please. And I just want to hit the equity one more time as an embedded. Couple things I want to let you know as it became important to the group is that it was a critical component. It's identified in the legislation and now in the Oregon statute to promote equity and social justice in all aspects of the district's operation. Meaning when we are thinking of when we are doing a capital investment, how do we go out with our with the proposals, the RFPs, to make sure that we're incorporating these issues into the process. When we make decisions about where we do our capital investments, how do we incorporate equity into those discussions? So I'm just trying to set the stage here. I think that we're going to be able to do some of this, and we'll talk about it, is with the mission, vision, values. Some of those components will be into that mission, vision, and value. We'll want to be able to define what equity is to the district, right? Not equity to the whole world, but how it applies to the work that we're doing for flood safety and control. We'll have some equity objectives that the board will want to determine, and we anticipate that in that process that we will have equity as part of the decision points as we go through. We'll be asking questions. We could be asking questions of ourselves. How does this impact our equity? Next slide, please.
Chairman, can I make a comment, please?
Go ahead, Paul.
I'd like to sort of come back to this section on equity also and talk about flood safety and water quality all sort of in one umbrella, and that we're not living only in an environment where floods are a bad thing. Floods are good and healthy for our river system.
Mhm.
And there were tribes up and down the Columbia River who are decimated. Their fish runs are gone, the villages were erased, all in the name of flood safety. And we built those levees, we gave people permission to live in the floodplain. And by doing so, we put people in harm's way. Think about what's in your house. If there's a flood, everything in your house can wash away, it's going to create all kinds of contamination. So you allow people to move into the floodplain, you're giving people permission to pollute. And so I want to move this beyond a discussion of just being, we're only here to protect people from flooding, when flooding actually, if you look at it in more equity basis, is going to be a balanced approach.
Good point. Thank you. Go ahead, Peggidy.
Okay, next, we talked about assets, capital planning and operations and maintenance. And can you hit that again for me, Jasmine, please? Assets, recognize that we have existing assets as in our inventory, and we are in the process. I want to make it clear is we, when I say MCDD and the other 3 districts, the Columbia Corridor Drainage Districts, are going through an exercise now. That's part of their responsibility to the new district, is to transfer those assets so that the new district can assume its duties, assets, and liabilities of those districts after the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District has put a revenue structure in place. Currently, there is an asset inventory. There's a process for evaluating the assets. We've not completed those, and identifying the levels of service. Asset management kind of incorporates all those things. They are not all done currently by the existing, and we'll be looking for the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District will have to be a part of this process of helping or facilitating some of those issues, including some of the including some of the issues of life cycle, levels of service, asset valuation. Currently, we'll be looking for a couple members of this board next month to consider the existing 4 districts are currently putting together a board, a small working group, a member from each board, to go through the process of helping to identify those assets and address evaluation, and not just the assets, but the obligations of those boards. And we may be looking, there may be a desire from those boards to have a couple members of this board participate in that process. We will be bringing that to the board, to this board, in November. And so there's a need to start integrating these issues. The next step is a capital plan. As I mentioned earlier, we currently carry, the existing districts currently do a 10-year capital plan. We will, as we need to go in and develop a rate development process, we really need to look at a 20-year capital improvement plan, which should incorporate, as I discussed earlier, costs that are identified by the Army Corps of Engineers, activities that need addressing for FEMA certification and accreditation, identify the costs that are associated with the, I've been identified through the drainage master plans that are in process. We've got MCDD and Penn 2 have both completed theirs. SDIC is close to being completed, and then we are going to finish up Penn 1. Those master plans tell us what our existing capacity, et cetera, is, which will tell us what our level of risk is in protecting our region. So we will be moving from a 10 to a 20 as you do the rate development process. Next item is operations and maintenance. And as I said before, the districts currently have operation and maintenance manual approved by the Corps of Engineers, but we will also be having to modify that as we go through our rounds of our asset management and improve our asset management strategy. And so those things will become part of this whole process. And that operations and maintenance is going to be a major part of our new revenue development model. And that should also take into consideration our asset management plan, because those asset management plans, many times, it's not just the replacement of those of major equipment, but as many of you already know, infrastructure may need major maintenance, which should be incorporated in this process. And the districts at this point aren't quite there yet, but I just wanted to get that clarified. Next slide, please. And the environment, obviously a major part. The Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District has in its statute to continue to improve the water quality, fish and wildlife habitat, floodplain restoration, and landscape resilience, and adapt to climate change. The new district is going to need to determine ongoing environmental objectives and programmatic functions that are going to need to be done to adhere to that. What some of those short and long-term capital investments. These are issues that the existing drainage districts have not addressed. It wasn't part of their mandate, it's yours. And the projected scope of watershed improvement plans, impacts and cost in the course of developing funding. So as I've walked through this process, I've tried to start to pull apart what the current drainage districts are doing, what is needed by the new district, and where there may be some opportunities for this new district to build on our system. One thing I did want to say is that we do have an environmental program. It is a much broader and a broader scope. It doesn't have as much detail to it. We just started that program up a year ago. So this will continue to be evolving, and we'll bring that information back to this team. Next slide, please. Administration, I think a lot of you all know about what administration is, but I think I don't want to forget here is with finance and budgets, we had a very active conversation about earlier about having sufficient oversight for our finance and budget activities. We are now, as we've talked about, are subject to public budget law and under the TSCC, Tax Supervisory and Conservation Commission, so their systems. So we are in the process of trying to get that put up and get it operating on your behalf. The legal, we currently have 2 staff on legal who you've both met, Hong and Kelly. That may need to shift over time as far as do we need more. We also use a lot of Miller Nash, so they have, especially Jeff Condit, who you are all familiar with, has made some presentations to you all. We are doing procurement currently through our contracting law. We have development review, which is a function that we currently follow for any development that is impacting the existing system has to go through a review process, not only, as you all know, for your local government entities, but is also done within our internal structure. Board administration, we have been being as supportive as we can with this board, but as this board becomes more active and needs more, you need that board administration assistance to be successful and provide you the feedback that you need at all times. We have public affairs, we have federal and local, we have a planning group, we have project management, which are mostly a lot of our engineers, our environmental and that kind of thing. We have also have communications group, which continues to move forward. I think with administration, the other big piece that we need to consider is as we move forward on community engagement and how do we, that may need a different organizational structure to support these efforts. Next slide, please. As meeting federal standards, we currently we are meeting those federal standards to our best. We are currently using the Corps' rehab and inspection program, so we maintain that effort. We work, our operations and maintenance is in alignment with that. The LRC, which we've been working with, and many of you have been a part of, is maintaining our levy certification to keep insurance rates low for our community. Next slide, please. And we all know capital funding, this gets back to a little bit of what Eric was alluding to earlier. We will be needing to do more extensive capital funding in the long term. We've got our, we've got the federal levy improvements that we have in place for that we have in place for the levy system. We're working with the Army Corps of Engineers now. We're in the midst of that phase 1 study where there was no local match, but we will, as we go into phase 2 for the PED, the board, the existing boards will be required to move forward to, we're looking at that phase 2 of being about 8.5 million with a local match of 2.5. And then that phase 3 is what the big chunk of change that we're looking at, and Eric alluded to, which is, you know, anywhere from 165 to 170 million with a local match of, let's just say 58 million. We have opportunities for general obligations bonds and also in collaboration with state loans and grants and other kind of collaborative funding, which the LRC is looking at. Any questions? I know it's a lot, but I want to make sure you understand what is being done, so you're not having to start from scratch, but also identifying what's out there in the future. So next slide, please. This is just a really quick, I don't even need to go in a lot of detail. I didn't put timelines to this. It was just more kind of the general process that I anticipate. This is not carved in stone, but is a process I anticipate we're going to be looking at moving forward to develop our mission, vision, values for this group. The critical importance for that mission, vision, values is to help kind of be our guidepost. We'll need to be doing public outreach around that to begin to build our community relations. I would anticipate that we'll be then going into a look at evaluate some of our revenue structure alternatives, address equity and environmental, develop some of our cost projections, methodology, and put together that first revenue model and test the concepts and test kind of what levels of work we're going to do and to what level of our operations and maintenance may do, you know, and maybe high, maybe low, maybe how do we focus and pull those levers. I anticipate we'll need to do a public outreach at that point to be able to start to feel where those communities are feeling. Ideally, I don't know if this is a possibility, but the beauty of if a rate model is done in a way that we may be able to have an opportunity for the community to kind of weigh in and pull some of those levers and see, well, if you want more of this, this is what it's going to cost, so that they begin to understand how this looks and provide the board feedback. We'll probably want to adjust that revenue structure down the road based on the public comments. Ultimately, we'll be approving that revenue structure, and then begin to initiate a billing process. So I know that's a lot, but I think I'm done. Any questions?
Oh, but you're getting a hand from Bob. What I'm going to do is move us along. We're a little behind schedule, so I want to keep us going. Colin, you're going to give us some more background on the LRC's work regarding the revenue model.
And Mike, I would just say that was a long presentation to go through and not allow any questions at the end.
Well, I'm happy to allow as many questions as you want. How late do you guys want to be here tonight? No, I'm kidding, Bob. Do you have questions, Bob?
Well, I do. You know, Peggidy, I really appreciate the presentation. I thought it was very clear and helpful. One of the things I appreciated was your comment about equity and how we had a real opportunity here to build from the ground up, a little different than other organizations that are trying to bring it in after they're established. But one of the concerns I've had, and I've raised it previously, is that the signature project for the district is going to be the levy rebuilds that are being undertaken through the core process. That core process does not address equity or the environment. In fact, equity and the environment are really defined out of their process. A lot of community groups have raised that concern. And I'm just concerned that as we move forward, that the first big thing this district does, and really the defining event for this district, is not going to meet those equity or environmental goals. And I'm wondering if you see any potential path forward to remedy that before they come to their final decision. Because the first real public outreach that this district does may well be a conflicted situation where the community is coming in and saying you're not meeting your mission.
I think there's a couple things here, Bob. One of them is that's one of the reasons I think it's really important we do our mission, vision, values process and identify how we are, what is important for us for equity and for covered by the CORE's funding. That 35% match will cover the core funding, but this organization, the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District, may feel how important it is to address those issues in the process so that you start to add on, that is more a local decision and activity. That's how I see it. I concur that the core has its mission. It is very structured, defined, and finite. I see this board, why equity and environmental has to be woven in from the beginning to be able to address the pieces that may not be done from a federal level.
Thank you.
Okay, Colin?
All right, are you able to hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, excellent. Jasmine, you go, oh, that slide, perfect. So I will try to be brief with this for time, but as Peggidy gave a great overview of where we're going and what some of the thinking is, what needs to go into the revenue analysis, I wanted to take a moment. You have to know where you're coming from to figure out where you're going to go, and to just give a quick overview of some of the governance work that we've done at the drainage districts through Levy Ready Columbia, and then a very quick discussion of some of the funding principles that the Levy Ready Columbia governance subcommittee had put together in 2019. And so this is just a very high level look at some of the modernization discussions that have taken place at Levy Ready Columbia. I do want to say that the drainage districts, well before even Kelly Sherbo was part of this when she was at PSU well before 2015, looking at different ways to consolidate the drainage districts. But in 2015, when the Levy Ready Columbia became an official Oregon Solutions project, one of the goals that was set in the Declaration of Cooperation was to modernize governance, with the recognition that in order to effectively manage this system, it really did need to be considered a full system and not a confederacy of separate districts. So that led to late 2016, when the Levy Ready Columbia Partnership put together a governance subcommittee, and many of you sitting in this virtual room took part in this. So thank you all very much for the innumerable, I could enumerate the number of hours that you all put towards it, but I don't think anyone would want to actually hear what that totaled up to. But those conversations really took a look at a number of possible governance models that could work for managing this system. Those meetings were held monthly, even bi-weekly, and really had some kind of high points where they came together in workshop format to sort of workshop out what preferred governance models would be. At the end of 2017, it was sort of decided that the best path forward would be to pursue legislation in Salem that would create a new district. And it wasn't prescriptive, but they were looking largely at a water improvement district as what it could be based on. And so in 2018, the Levy Ready Columbia partners and drainage district boards had a number of conversations and did decide to pursue legislation. And so that took place in the 2019 session. There were two bills, but Senate Bill 431 officially created ORS 550, the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District, which you are all board members of. And so there was a lot of work behind that, and it largely was leading towards having these conversations that you guys are engaging with right now. And that's to take a look at how to effectively manage this, how to take a look at sort of a larger mandate and required work that's needed in this area, and how to fund that. And so just to quickly highlight, before going into that 2019 session, the governance subcommittee did make the determination through a revenue analysis that was done with a couple consultants, that there was, they were able to demonstrate through that revenue analysis that we could move from roughly a $100 million 20-year budget up to a $250 million 20-year budget. And the revenue analysis showed that wouldn't have any kind of substantial increase for any of the ratepayers. And so I do want to really highlight that was a proof of concept to show that you could take our existing property assessment and move it into a rate model. And it did not take into account the broader mandate and requirements that you have before you. And we also have significantly more operational information than we did in 2017. So these are the types of things that you as board members will need to incorporate into the revenue analysis, as well as what the legislation allows around a broader set of tools to use in addition to just moving from a property assessment into a rate model. And then the last thing I want to highlight, and Jasmine, if you can move to the next slide, please. In 2019, while the legislation was going on, there was that working group that was Levy Ready Columbia Governance Subcommittee, sort of deputized a working group of administrative utility experts to go through the different revenue rate models that had been developed, and to address what the pros and cons of those were, and then also to establish what the overall funding principles should be. And that conversation was largely driven by the Levy Ready Columbia group not wanting to be prescriptive to you as a board to say this is how we think it should be done. It was with the recognition that you had that much broader mandate and that you were obviously a independent board that would need to make these decisions. But they also didn't want to lose the values that had been discussed over the 5 years. And so I'm just going to very quickly go through what some of those are. And they were memorialized and approved by the administrative subcommittee and brought up to the Levy Ready Columbia's project team in 2019. So principle or value 1 is sustainability of budgets, really making sure that we're able to pay for the recertification as well as overall needs around modernization. So making sure that we had sufficient funding to be able to prepare for the future. Number 2 was having equitable distribution, largely amongst the different districts, which was considering the geographic ownership of some of the legacy capital projects. And also really around that equitable distribution of costs was to consider some of the tax compression effects on particular districts and how that affected revenue and ability to invest over the past years. The third value was that of fairness, which was considering what customers currently pay and minimizing large increases or decreases for individual customers. Really the principle of fairness when looking at how to develop a rate or whatever revenue tool is identified. And then there was a presumption around that a utility rate would be pursued. And so making sure that that utility rate was also equitable and based on really where benefits were received or costs were incurred. And then the fifth was simple implementation administration. It was recognized that, this is possibly over a much larger geographic area and possibly having layered or different tiers, making sure that whatever is identified by this group, your board, had implementation administration considered and how to simplify that. And then overall, basing all these decisions in sound asset management practice. And Peggidy highlighted that earlier, really something that the drainage districts are establishing now and will be bringing you more information is employing an asset management approach to all our capital and operations. So I'll end there because there's a lot more that you as a board will need to consider. And I think in future briefings, we'll be able to go deeper into the actual revenue analysis that was performed and to crack open the hood, as it were.
Thank you, Colin. Questions of Colin?
Yes, so really to you, Mike, could we have the output or this 2019 revenue development model, if you could put that into a Dropbox folder or share it with us in some way, I would greatly appreciate that. Be an easy way for me to get up to speed on work that's been done.
Yeah. Colin, do you want to answer that on how we're going to do that? Or do we know?
I think we do. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I do think that having some further summary. So I don't know if it's at the next meeting or soon. We'll be able to go deeper into it. As far as what is actually in that analysis, it truly is. It's a proof of concept, and so it was really using sort of benchmarking 2017 assessments by the drainage districts and using sort of how we manage assets at that time. And seeing if we could translate that into a rate given. So I think maybe it's
anyway.
Yeah.
At some point, the whole board is going to want to be able to absorb that work and understand it.
Yes.
So I realize I painfully remember all the different things we went through. But it seems as though there were different reports for the project committee that was at a different level, weren't quite in the weeds as far. Perhaps starting there with the whole board to get them familiar. And then as people want to dive deeper into the detail, we can do that. I'll just suggest also that this board may want to form a subcommittee to do that deeper work. It's really hard in a group of 17 to go through things at that level of detail, but any individual may want to dive and understand what the LRC group did previously. So I just say from a staffing perspective, you may want to start thinking about how do you start feeding us this information and allow us to assimilate it pretty soon, actually.
Oh, that was planned for our next meeting.
Okay.
To begin that process.
Well, if we can get something out in advance so people can chew on it a little bit,
yes,
that would be great.
That's exactly my point, Mike. I'd like to be able to understand the background to it so I don't come in and ask blindly obvious questions. So next question is really on fairness. When we did this, Colin, you highlighted that you were really looking for a rate utility model that didn't move the price paid up unfairly too much up or down. Did you consider at all capability to pay as part of your fairness equation, or is that something that we should consider as we look into the equity component?
For the values that the working group put together, it was really being sensitive to the large increases and decreases for individual customers. So that's what is memorialized in the values. During some of the committee conversations, there was definitely a conversation around equity, especially with relations to the issues of tax compression, where similar lot sizes with homes with similar footprints, but with values, say $100,000 house versus $1 million house paying the exact same rate. That's where the kind of consideration around ability to pay was discussed. But I think that's a great thing to bring into this revenue analysis moving forward.
Thank you.
Okay, we're still a little behind. Peggidy, you wanted to?
I just wanted to quickly go over. I know that Mike, you covered some of this mission, vision, values question and discussion in our last meeting. And I just wanted, and now we've talked about a lot of issues as they relate to today about equity, environmental guiding principles, etc. And I just think it will be an advantage to the board to have an understanding of mission, vision, values of their own organization. And we, as just want to give you all an update that we will be initiating a scope of work and going out with that concept to be able to help with that process for this board.
And Peggidy, is that a scope of work for a consulting
Yes.
you already have on board, or that you're looking?
No, we do not have somebody on board. We're putting that scope of work together now. Okay. And if people want to weigh in on that, participate, please let me know. But we are in the process of putting together the scope of work and then going out with an RFP.
So, okay. I think the board would be very interested in what that scope looks like. So,
okay.
Bringing it to us would be, I think, a good thing next month.
Okay.
Okay. And Tanny?
Hey, good afternoon. I'll try to be brief. First off, this pipe is not reflective of the pipe that's going into the bank full of money. It's a little smaller than that. Earlier this month, we made a request to the IGA board at their meeting for some unallocated funds. And the line item funding adjustments, these came from staff totaling $122,832. And the IGA board was very supportive at their last meeting, and the formal action will be coming at their next meeting. So what that does is that gets us to 662,000 of the 760 that we were trying to get to for the budget shortfall, and pretty much gets us to where we can get done what we need to get done without any other problems. Any questions?
Tanny.
Hey, good job, Tanny. Good job.
Very well done. What would be the formal action of the board to memorialize this? Would we be going through a budget amendment process?
We would.
Peggidy and okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
We
Can I ask,
And
being a non-accountant, non-budget understanding person, I know there's a lot of work in front of the staff now. There's been 2 job descriptions. When do they get to hire these people? Do we need to take board action? My concern is I'm one of those people that sat at the very first Levy Ready Columbia meeting. I think Bob Salinger was there as well in 2015. And all of that work and all of that time could go down the tubes if staff becomes overworked and just gets tired and leaves, which I wouldn't, I mean, there's an immense amount of work that just went into this meeting and the documents went into it. So my concern is, how do we support that work, get the 2 new people on board so that this project doesn't fall apart?
well, and I would say the big piece of that is what we've done now. We're getting the money.
Well, I understand that, but how do we spend the money so that in the next month, people that are overworked, stressed out, are just going to give up? Because I can't even imagine, and I think we're all supportive of what they've done. I see no indication that they've overspent or underworked or any of those things. And it's kind of like asking them to run a marathon after a marathon after a marathon. And what's standing in the way of saying Peggidy can hire the staff people to support the existing staff that's tremendously overworked?
So thanks, Mary Helen. Tanny, did you want to respond to that?
I can, or you can go ahead, Mike.
Okay. I think what we've been trying to do for the last couple of months is line up so that we have a relatively confident picture that we have the revenue to be able to support this budget as presented. We still have to take some formal action to actually change the budget. But I know that Peggidy and the staff have been doing some preliminary work to try and bring on more help. And so I think we're at a position where we've accumulated the money we think we need for this budget, which includes some committee staff, administration, our payment back to MCDD for support of different elements. So I'm comfortable allowing Peggidy and the staff to move forward with bringing on some help. I'd be interested if there's any objections to that now that we basically have the money in hand, but we do have to take the formal actions to adjust the budgets.
Right.
I've got a question. How do you determine what the number is, whether it's 1, 2, or 3 additional people?
We have gone through a pretty extensive, we've actually identified 2 FTE. One is a half FTE for a finance position to help set up. We are in the process of trying to set up your own accounting system and finance system, which has to be separate from the existing districts and has to follow TSCC requirements and public budget law. And we need an additional half-time person to do that. We have identified previously the need to have a board administrator or board project manager to help to, you know, as you all evolve, you have more questions, which you should, and have more needs and demands. As a consequence, we really need someone on staff to be able to meet those needs and demands that are separate. And then the other half FTE that we're looking at would not be needed till probably another couple months, which would be more of a budget position and a budget staff to meet your specific budget requirement reporting, which is different than anything anything the existing districts have done before. So that's where we are currently. We have gone through interviews for a budget and a board support staff. No one has been hired as we wait to move forward. Our concern, especially with the finance, is to set up that system is going to take a little more than it's going to take a couple months to set it up for and we have to create it, set it up before you can even spend money out of your existing budget. You can spend money out of the JCA budget for the grant dollars, but the 40,000 that was set up and potentially the 122,000 that comes from LRC would need to move into that budget. Your
Peggy,
budget, yeah.
These envisioned staff are limited duration, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So one other thing.
That was part of the.
Anyway, Mary Helen.
No, I was going to say one other thing. Just today in the meeting, there were several requests from committee members, board members, and I have always entertained and supported this new special district having unique qualities, unlike any others, and that got mentioned as well. That takes time and effort to do the research. The whole equity part, we've identified that, and it's very, very important in our work. But as we've heard and learned over the whatever years it is, 5 years, that's not part of U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So it's going to be work that goes on here. And so rather than try and make them do it, we can do it, be innovative, be a national model. I don't care. But all of that's going to take staff time. And for us to keep asking the people that ran the district, 4 districts, and correct me if I'm wrong, Peggidy, but I counted 6 committees, just sending out notices. Eric asked for a report. Yeah, Eric asked for a report. I have ones that I would like to learn. I'm not the brightest bulb of the bunch, and so I take a lot of attention. I couldn't even find the Zoom meeting thing, but I think we need to realize the reality of the situation, and I don't want it to break, because I didn't spend 5 years of my life for a really innovative opportunity to provide equitable solutions to a number of things. And so my concern is we need to make a budget amendment so they can move forward and do the work that they're overworked, not taxed, and not, I think they're all dedicated enough that they don't dread to come to work, but I think they like their work, but sometimes it's just got to be too much. And so, yeah, what do we do right now today?
I think we all agree with you, Mary Helen. I think the issue is just, we can make this work. We just have to make sure we're stepping through the right hoops to make it work. So without objection, I certainly think the staff can continue on the path to bring on help and get them assimilated and all of those things. And we need a budget amendment prepared so that this board can take that action at its next meeting.
So we have to wait a month for them
I
to?
didn't say that, Mary Helen.
Oh, okay.
I said that they can continue on the path they've been on to bring on help. We have to realize that we've got a budget amendment that we have to pass, and you've got the budget before you on the screen, that reflects this change in funding. So that's where we are. Mike Weatherby, you were going to say something?
No, that's okay. You took the words out of my mouth.
Okay, all right. So without objection, I think we're ready to move forward on those dual paths so that we can keep everything going here.
We'll keep afloat.
I have 10 minutes to talk about schedule. Tanny, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry. I just wanted to say, you know, part of this was we had the 500,000 that we didn't have, and then we're looking for money, and it's really hard to hire people when you don't know how you're going to pay them.
No, absolutely.
And I would like the board to consider taking a different approach for this next year, since we don't have any money, and tasking the subcommittee with working on that now. This is a great group of people, and I think we can make some progress, but it would be a lot easier to do this before the fiscal year than 3 months into it.
I couldn't
agree.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
And actually, I appreciate that because the TSCC is going to have their line of when in their process. So the sooner that, as you move through this, we can keep our communication up with TSCC about the coming year.
Okay.
There's no question we fall off a really steep cliff if we don't have another source or multiple sources of funding for the out years here. So it's actually a great point, Tanny. So we'll keep working. I promised at 4:55 we'd get to public comment. It's 4:59. Emily, have we had anyone sign up or come in?
No, no one I've seen.
Okay, great. I also know there was 10 minutes on the schedule for me to talk, I guess, to talk about board schedule. I don't know what that was about. As far as I know, we're still on the third Monday. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So if that issue, if there's anything on that issue, are there any other questions or comments for the good of the order today?
No.
I want to say I appreciate you all hanging in there and having to be sponges at this kind of early stage of the game when we just keep throwing more and more information at you. I guarantee you it won't be too much longer before we're asking you grinding on some real questions that we have to move forward, particularly around the cost basis, the environmental part of the mission vision values, and assimilating all of that with an acceptable rate model or revenue model that we all can get behind. So, and along with that, engaging the broader public in those conversations. So it's coming, plenty of work coming. I also want to wish you all well and hope you're making it around okay. I don't know about you guys, but this is the most unusual, strange, challenging, freaking weird year I've been through in 35 years of public life. And I'll tell you, it's taken its toll on all of us. And so please be safe, take care of yourself. I hope nobody had to evacuate or anything at any of these fires. So with that, if there's nothing else, we're adjourned. Have a great.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, so.
Thank you.
Thanks. Goodbye.